You know that feeling, right? That persistent drag, that heavy-eyed sensation that just seems to stick around no matter how much sleep you think you're getting.
Oh, absolutely.
It's so incredibly common that year after year, more and more people are turning to their screens and typing in those four little words, why am I so tired?
Yeah, it's everywhere.
It's this universal thing we all experience, this feeling that unites us in a state of like bleary-eyed confusion. And yet the real reasons behind it often feel so elusive.
That's such a relatable starting point. And you're right, it's so much more than just the usual suspects we always hear about.
Exactly.
Today, we're really going to dig deep, going way beyond the standard advice of just, trying to squeeze in another hour of sleep or putting down your phone a little earlier.
Which is good advice, but maybe not the whole story.
Right. Our mission in this deep dive is to unpack some of the less obvious, but perhaps even more significant, things that are contributing to this widespread feeling of fatigue in modern life, the kind you might be experiencing right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We've got some really fascinating material here, and we're going to be looking at the bigger picture of why so many of us are feeling so well trained.
Mm-hmm.
What's particularly interesting is that a lot of it comes down to what's happening right now during our waking hours.
Yeah, the daytime stuff.
These daytime experiences have a really profound impact, not just on how much energy you have throughout the day, but also on the quality of your sleep and, whether you wake up feeling truly refreshed and ready to go.
And to really get to the heart of why this might be happening to you, we need to take a little journey back in time. Let's think about our very distant ancestors, say, around 300,000 years ago.
Okay.
Picture a guy we'll call Johnny Caveman. Now, physically, his brain structure was remarkably similar to yours and mine today. Same basic hardware, if you will.
Right. The same brain, essentially.
Yeah. But the way he used that brain, the demands that were placed upon it each day, were drastically fundamentally different.
Right. So picture Johnny's morning routine. It was pretty straightforward, right? You can imagine it.
Super simple.
He might have had a few really simple decisions. Where's the nearest clean source of water? Should I join the hunting party today, or is it better to stay closer to the camp and gather berries and roots?
Yeah, basic survival choices.
Maybe a quick visual check to see if those newly discovered mushrooms still look safe to eat. If we could somehow measure the activity in his prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain right behind your forehead that's heavily involved in planning and making decisions, it would likely be pretty calm.
Relatively low activity, yeah.
His day involved a lot of routine tasks and relatively few simple choices for his brain to process.
Now let's fast forward a few 100,000 years to, let's say, the 20th century. Our hypothetical Johnny Caveman finds himself in a factory.
Okay, Industrial Revolution, Johnny.
You can picture this too, perhaps. He's waking up to an alarm clock, maybe deciding what to have for breakfast, what clothes to put on for his shift.
More decisions already.
At work, he's probably performing repetitive tasks on an assembly line. Certainly that's more decisions than his ancient counterpart had: when to take a break, how to handle a minor snag on the line. But the overall cognitive load, the sheer complexity of the choices he faced, was still relatively limited.
Still manageable, you're saying?
You wouldn't see that prefrontal cortex constantly firing on all cylinders. Not like today.
But now, let's really jump forward and catapult Johnny Caveman into 2024. Just think about your own morning, for instance. Before 8:30 a.m., the mental checklist has already begun, hasn't it?
Oh, it's relentless.
Did you sleep well? Where did you leave your phone? What's the schedule for the kids today? Oh, wait, you need to remember to put a load of laundry in.
The mental juggling act.
These socks don't match. Do you have time to find another pair? What are you going to have for lunch? Should you reschedule that meeting that's been hanging over your head? Do you already have that leftover pasta dish yesterday? You need to remember to send those receipts in, file that report. The list just seems to go on and on.
And that's just before your workday even starts properly.
It's estimated that modern humans make around 35,000 decisions every single day, with over 200 of those related to food alone.
35,000. Wow.
So by the time 8:30 a.m. rolls around, our modern-day Johnny's prefrontal cortex is likely in absolute overdrive.
And this is where a really central paradox arises for many people, and maybe for you as well. We have all these incredible modern conveniences, washing machines, dishwashers, even robot vacuums, all designed to reduce physical labor.
Less physical work, definitely.
Yet, despite doing far less manual work than our ancestors ever did, we often feel overwhelmingly, inexplicably tired. So the key question for you to consider becomes, if it's not physical exertion that's draining us, what exactly is it?
Right, what's going on?
And the answer, as we're about to explore in this deep dive, really lies in the intense activity that's happening inside our brains as we navigate this constant, relentless barrage of decisions.
It's the mental load.
It's almost like our modern Johnny is facing more critical mushroom safety decisions before breakfast than his ancient counterpart faced all day.
Okay, so it really does sound like we're in this constant battle, kind of internal war, as it were, between our individual selves and the seemingly endless demands of the modern world.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
A war. And it seems this battle is sought on two main fronts, the daytime and then the nighttime. So let's start right there with that daytime battlefield and really dig into what happens in our brains when we're faced with this relentless, never-ending stream of choices that you encounter every day.
Exactly. When you make even a seemingly simple decision, it's not just a straightforward on-off switch in your brain. It actually involves intricate communication happening between different regions.
Okay.
This communication occurs through electrical signals that travel along neurons, those specialized brain cells that you have billions of. And crucially, this entire signaling process relies very heavily on a specific neurotransmitter called glutamate.
Okay, so glutamate is like the essential messenger that keeps those lines of communication open and flowing in our brain.
You got it. It's key for that communication.
But what exactly happens after a decision is made and that message has been sent? Does it just vanish?
Well, what's really fascinating, according to some of the newer research, including some really interesting work coming out of the Paris Brain Institute, is that after glutamate has done its job, it doesn't just disappear.
Yeah.
It actually sticks around in the system for a little while.
Mhm.
And as you continue to make decision after decision throughout your busy day, this glutamate starts to accumulate in the spaces between your neurons.
So it builds up.
It builds up. Think of it almost like the byproduct, the exhaust fumes of intense mental activity.
Okay, like mental trash.
If too much of this glutamate builds up, it can actually start to clog the system, making it more difficult for your neurons to communicate effectively.
Ah, so it gums up the works.
Precisely. This neurological congestion, even without any physical exertion whatsoever, can lead directly to those feelings of mental fatigue and that sense of being utterly drained that you might experience.
Even if you've just been sitting at a desk all day.
Exactly. So the key takeaway here is that modern life's constant decision-making, unlike our ancestors' experiences, is actually creating a physical form of mental fatigue in our brains.
That's a really helpful analogy of the city streets getting completely clogged up with trash.
Yeah.
So our brains are essentially working incredibly hard all day long, constantly generating this waste in the form of excess glutamate.
Mm-hmm.
And if it builds up faster that it can be effectively cleared away, we start to feel really bogged down and mentally tired, even if you haven't been doing anything physically strenuous.
Precisely. And it's also really interesting to note that some cultures seem to have developed a very natural antidote to this kind of midday mental fatigue that you might feel.
Yeah.
The widespread practice of biphasic sleep or taking a nap.
Ah, the siesta.
The siesta. Particularly in many Mediterranean countries, taking a siesta in the afternoon is just a normal part of the day. And research has actually suggested some tangible benefits to this, including increased brain functioning and a significant around 37% lower risk of heart disease.
Right. 37% lower risk.
That's
It's
huge.
huge, which is such a stark contrast to the general attitude towards napping during the workday here in many parts of the United States.
Oh, totally.
It's often seen as something unproductive or even a sign of laziness, isn't it?
It really highlights that potential evolutionary mismatch we touched on earlier. Our brains, which evolved for a world with far fewer and much less complex decisions, haven't quite caught up and adapted to the relentless cognitive demands that you face in 2024.
We're running caveman software on modern hardware, sort of.
Kind of, yeah. So the question becomes, what practical steps can you take to try and mitigate this daytime battle with this buildup of glutamate?
Well, while the idea of a midday siesta might not be feasible for many of us given our work schedules, sadly,
Right, not always practical.
the core concept of somehow limiting the sheer number of decisions that we make each day seems like a really key takeaway here for you. I know we talk about some specific strategies for how to actually do that.
Exactly. There are some surprisingly simple things that can make a noticeable difference in the amount of cognitive load you're carrying. For example, planning your outfits for the entire week in advance.
Oh, I try that sometimes.
So you're not standing in front of your closet every single morning agonizing over what to wear. Some incredibly successful individuals like Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg famously adopted a very uniform approach to clothing specifically to eliminate that daily decision altogether.
A work uniform approach. Makes sense.
Meal planning is another really effective strategy for you. Deciding on your meals for the week ahead of time can significantly reduce decision fatigue, especially when you're already feeling mentally drained at the end of a long day.
Yeah, avoiding that what's for dinner debate when you're already tired.
Exactly that.
That makes a lot of sense. And building on that idea of reducing cognitive load, another major source of mental exhaustion that you likely face in the modern world is the constant barrage of information that we're all exposed to every single day.
Absolutely. You are constantly being bombarded with information from countless different sources. Just navigating that overwhelming information landscape itself requires a significant amount of cognitive effort and can contribute to that feeling of being mentally worn out.
It's exhausting just trying to keep up sometimes. And this might be a good point for us to mention Ground News, who supported this deep dive.
Mm.
It's a really valuable tool that's designed to help you manage this very information overload by providing transparency on news sources, helping you understand their potential biases, and assessing their overall reliability.
Yeah, that transparency is key. What's particularly valuable for you as a listener is its focus on really empowering critical thinking.
How so?
Features like their blind spot feed actually encourage you to step outside of your usual information bubble and actively consider diverse perspectives on important issues.
Oh, interesting. So it shows you what you might be missing.
Exactly. In a world that's absolutely saturated with news and opinions, having tools like this that help you navigate it thoughtfully, rather than just passively consuming whatever comes your way, is absolutely crucial for reducing that feeling of being constantly overwhelmed.
Okay, so we've talked about the buildup of glutamate in your brain from making too many decisions throughout the day. Reducing decisions helps. Now, you also mentioned another really key player in this daytime battle against fatigue, a chemical called adenosine.
Ah, yes, adenosine.
What exactly is its role in making you feel tired?
Adenosine is a truly fascinating example of our brain's natural signaling system at work within you. Think of it almost like a chemical that gradually accumulates in your brain throughout the entire day as you engage in any kind of mental and physical activity.
So the longer you're awake and active, the more adenosine you have.
Precisely. Its increasing buildup serves as a very natural signal directly to your brain that it's time to slow down, to rest, and to eventually go to sleep. It's essentially the natural trigger for that feeling of sleepiness that you experience.
So adenosine is basically our body's natural way of saying, hey, you've been working hard all day. It's definitely time for a break now.
Exactly. It's the time to rest molecule.
But of course, we have our ways of temporarily overriding that important signal, don't we? I think I know where this is going.
We certainly do. Enter caffeine, arguably the world's most popular and widely used drug.
Knew it.
Coffee.
Caffeine works its magic by actually blocking adenosine receptors in your brain.
Okay, so it blocks the signal.
It doesn't stop the actual production of adenosine, but it effectively prevents it from binding to those receptors, which in turn masks that underlying feeling of tiredness and allows you to keep going, even when your body is signaling that it needs rest.
Which perfectly explains that temporary boost of energy and alertness that you get from your morning cup of coffee. That feeling of, I'm awake now. That's the caffeine blocking the adenosine.
But what about that almost inevitable afternoon crash that so many of us experience? What's happening there?
That afternoon crash happens because, eventually, the effects of the caffeine wear off. All that adenosine that has been steadily building up in your system throughout the day, but has been unable to exert its effects because of the caffeine blockade.
It's still been building up silently.
Exactly. It suddenly floods back in and is
Yeah.
able to bind to those receptors. It's almost like a dam breaking, leading to that very pronounced and often quite sudden feeling of fatigue that you might be all too familiar with.
The dam breaks. That makes perfect sense now.
So we're essentially borrowing energy from our future selves by temporarily blocking these natural tiredness signals in our bodies.
That's a really good way to think about it, yeah. Borrowing energy.
Now, I've heard about some really interesting strategies for working with this adenosine cycle rather than just constantly fighting against it. Things like coffee naps. Can you tell us a little more about how those work for you? Yeah, the coffee nap. It's quite clever, actually. The core idea is to try and take advantage of both the stimulating effects of caffeine and the fatigue-reducing benefits of a short nap, all in a very strategic way.
Okay, how does it work?
The method is simple. You drink a cup of coffee relatively quickly and then immediately lie down to take a brief nap, usually somewhere in the range of 15 to 20 minutes.
Drink coffee, then nap. Seems counterintuitive.
It does. But during this short nap, your body actually starts to clear out some of that accumulated adenosine. Then, when you wake up, the caffeine, which takes about 20 minutes to kick in, starts to work. But instead of having to fight against a massive buildup of adenosine,
Because the nap cleared some of it out.
exactly, it essentially has a cleaner slate to work with, leading to a more pronounced and sustained boost in alertness and focus for you.
That sounds surprisingly effective, almost like a biological hack. And I think you also mentioned another interesting way for you to potentially manage that dreaded afternoon caffeine crash.
Yes, it involves strategically timing when you have your first cup of coffee in the morning.
Timing matters, huh?
It really can. Instead of reaching for it the very moment you wake up, try delaying it for a little while, maybe until mid-morning, say sometime between 9 and 11 a.m.
Wait, don't drink coffee first thing. That's tough for some people.
I know. But doing this can actually help to better align the peak effects of the caffeine and therefore the eventual crash with the end of your workday, rather than having it hit you right in the middle of the afternoon when you still have several hours of work ahead of you.
Ah, so you shift the crash later in the day.
Huh.
Clever. Okay, so that really covers the daytime battlefield for you. The overload of decisions, the buildup of glutamate, the crucial role of adenosine, and how caffeine interacts with it all.
Right, the daytime drama.
Now, let's shift our focus to the nighttime battlefield. Sleep itself. We all know that the general recommendation is to aim for around 7 to 8 hours of sleep each night, but it seems like there's a lot more to feeling truly rested than just the total duration of sleep you get.
Absolutely. While the quantity of sleep is certainly critically important for you, the actual timing of your sleep also plays a really significant role in how refreshed you feel.
The timing. Okay.
As we touched on earlier, our ancient human ancestors living in close-knit groups likely benefited from having varied sleep patterns within the community.
For safety, right. Someone always awake.
Exactly. This would have ensured that there was always someone awake and alert to provide nighttime vigilance against any potential threats. This evolutionary pressure over millennia actually led to the development of different natural sleep-wake cycles, which we now refer to as chronotypes.
So this idea that some people are naturally morning larks who feel most energetic early in the day, while others are night owls who really come alive in the evening, isn't just a matter of personal preference or habit. It actually has a very real evolutionary basis in all of us.
Precisely. While there are generally 4 commonly defined chronotypes, the most important takeaway for you is that individuals have genetically influenced predispositions for when their bodies are naturally inclined to sleep and be awake.
So it's wired into us.
To a large extent, yes. However, our modern society, with its very rigid and standardized 9-to-5 workday schedule, often forces everyone into the exact same sleep schedule, completely regardless of their own natural internal biological clock or chronotype.
Right. The world expects everyone to be a morning person, basically.
Pretty much. This fundamental misalignment between your natural sleep-wake cycle and your required schedule can very easily lead to chronic sleep deprivation and that persistent feeling of fatigue that you might be struggling with. It's another really clear example of that evolutionary mismatch we've been discussing.
That really resonates. I know so many people, myself included at times, who really struggle to function well in the morning despite feeling like they've gotten what should be enough hours of sleep. And then you have others who are wide awake late into the night.
Totally. The night owl's forced into a lark's world.
So what's the practical solution here for you? How can we actually work with our natural chronotypes rather than constantly fighting against them?
Well, the very first and most crucial step for you is simply awareness. Understanding and identifying your own natural chronotype can be incredibly helpful.
Figure out if you're a lark or an owl or somewhere in between.
There are actually quite a few reliable online tests available, and we can definitely make sure to include a link to one of those in the resources for this deep dive, maybe even as a QR code you can easily scan that can give you a much better understanding of your own natural sleep-wake tendencies.
Okay, good. Find a test.
Once you have this valuable information, the ultimate goal is to try and align your lifestyle as much as practically possible with your natural chronotype.
Easier said than done sometimes, though.
Oh, for sure. This might involve, if you have some flexibility, adjusting your work schedule. Or even if you don't have that option, it could simply mean being more mindful of when you naturally feel your most energetic and productive periods are during the day, and when you naturally start to feel tired and ready to wind down. Working with your rhythm, not against it.
Okay, so really understanding our own natural sleep rhythms is incredibly important for feeling rested. But even if you manage to consistently get enough hours of sleep at a time that feels right for you, It seems like the actual quality of that sleep also matters significantly for waking up feeling truly refreshed and ready to tackle the day.
Absolutely. Sleep is far from being a passive state. It's actually a period of very intense restorative activity for both our brains and our bodies.
It's not just downtime.
Not at all. During sleep, your brain works hard to consolidate all memories from the day. Your muscles and your entire circulatory system get a chance to really relax and recover. And crucially, your body actively works to clear out those metabolic byproducts that we've been discussing, like glutamate and adenosine.
Ah, so sleep is when the brain's trash collectors work, clearing out the glutamate.
Exactly. That's a vital function. However, it's important to understand that not all sleep is created equally, and your pre-bedtime habits can have a really profound impact on the overall quality and restorative power of your sleep.
The dreaded sleep hygiene topic.
hmm You mentioned using a personal example to really illustrate this concept of poor sleep hygiene and its potential consequences for you. Can you walk us through a typical scenario that many of us might unfortunately be able to relate to?
Absolutely. Imagine this very common scenario.
hmm
It's around 8 p.m., you finally get home after a long day, and maybe you have a late dinner. Sounds familiar?
Then, feeling like you still have a few more things to accomplish, you sit back down to do some more work on your laptop. Even though your natural inclination might be to start winding down around 10 p.m., you pour yourself another cup of coffee to try and push through that adenosine-induced tiredness that's starting to creep in.
The late night coffee trap.
You finally finish up your work late, say around midnight, but then decide to unwind by watching a couple of episodes of your favorite show on a bright screen for a couple of hours.
The just one more episode phenomenon.
That blue light that's being emitted by the screen actually signals directly to your brain that it's still daytime, which in turn inhibits the natural release of melatonin, that crucial hormone that helps to shift your brain into sleep mode.
So the screen is telling your brain, stay awake.
Pretty much. Finally, around 2 a.m., you turn off the TV and head to bed. But your melatonin levels are still quite low, and the caffeine from that late cup of coffee is likely still blocking those important adenosine signals that tell your body it's time to sleep.
A double whammy. Low melatonin, blocked adenosine.
You might even quickly check your phone one last time while you're lying in bed. Eventually, you do fall asleep, but it's now closer to 3 a.m., and your alarm clock is set to go off at 8 a.m.
Not enough sleep.
You only end up getting about 5 hours of sleep, which is likely not nearly enough time for your body to fully clear out all those accumulated metabolic chemicals we talked about.
So the glutamate and adenosine don't get fully cleared.
Right. So the next morning, you wake up feeling groggy, with residual glutamate still affecting your brain function, and the whole vicious cycle unfortunately begins all over again, making countless decisions throughout the day, building up even more glutamate and adenosine, and then relying on caffeine just to get through it.
Wow. That really paints a very clear and unfortunately quite relatable picture of how these seemingly small everyday habits can very quickly create a really vicious cycle of persistent fatigue for you.
It's easy to fall into that trap.
So the seemingly straightforward advice really is to prioritize consistently getting enough hours of good quality sleep and to really wind down properly in those crucial hours leading up to bedtime, actively avoiding stimulants like caffeine and also depressants like alcohol, both of which can significantly disrupt the natural architecture and restorative power of your sleep.
Simple advice, but hard to follow sometimes.
Definitely. And it sounds like there are a wealth of resources available out there for people who want to delve even deeper into optimizing their individual sleep habits.
Exactly. And it's so important for you to remember that the various factors we've discussed with you today are certainly not an exhaustive list of absolutely everything that can potentially contribute to feelings of fatigue.
Right. There could be other things going on too.
Absolutely. However, they do really highlight some of the less commonly discussed, yet incredibly relevant aspects of our modern lives and how our brains actually function. It's a really important reminder that feeling tired all the time is often far more complex than just simply not getting enough sleep or spending too much time looking at screens before bed.
It goes deeper.
It's often deeply rooted in this very fundamental mismatch between our evolved brains and the often unnatural demands of the modern world that we inhabit.
It's a bit sobering to really think about, but it's also incredibly insightful and empowering at the same time. While I think we can all agree that we certainly wouldn't want to trade away all the incredible benefits and conveniences of modern life.
No, definitely not going back to caveman days.
You really understanding these underlying mechanisms of fatigue can definitely empower us to make some small but potentially significant adjustments in our own daily routines. I know I'm personally already thinking about a few simple tweaks that I can start making based on what we've discussed today, really hoping to nudge that overall energy balance in a more positive direction for myself.
Absolutely. It's really all about finding those small but meaningful levers that you can pull in your own life to better align your daily habits and routines with your fundamental biological needs. Small changes can make a big difference.
So for you who's been listening along with us today, really take a moment to consider all this information that we've unpacked in this deep dive. Does it really resonate with your own personal experiences of constantly feeling tired? What specific points really stood out to you?
And here's just one final thought for you to really chew on. Given this inherent evolutionary mismatch that we've explored, are we perhaps unknowingly working directly against our own fundamental biology in the very way that we structure our days and our nights?
Hmm, that's a big question.
What seemingly small changes might you be able to make that could actually lead to significant improvements in your overall energy levels and your general well-being, especially when you consider that very delicate balance of brain chemistry and the constant load of decision-making that you navigate every single day?
Thinking about those little adjustments.
Take a moment now to really reflect on your own daily routines. Are there any potential glutamate traps that you might be consistently falling into without even realizing it? Or perhaps is there a significant misalignment with your own natural sleep schedule that you might be able to address, even in small ways?
Time for some self-reflection.
It's really all about starting that process of personal self-reflection and perhaps even experimenting with a few small changes to see what kind of positive impact they might have on your overall energy and how you feel each day.